Hey guys, wanted to talk to you about Exodus 20 verse 7 today, and we've talked about this a little bit before in the past, but we're basically looking at the Ten Commandments and one commandment in particular. It says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." And I want you to see kind of the severity of his view there. If you look at these other commandments here, very few of them does God give consequences, and even fewer does God give severe consequences right in the commandment that says, I will not hold you guiltless. I will not overlook this kind of transgression. And we've talked about this a little bit before in the past, what it is to take the Lord's name in vain. If we look at Proverbs 30 verses 7 through 9, the writer there is basically talking about, make me neither rich nor poor, but feed me with food convenient for me. I don't want to be rich so that I basically become focused on the world and I lose sight of you, but I don't want to be poor such that I steal for my very existence, for my survival, and I take your name in vain. And that's the key thing right there. What it is that the writer here is talking about is to take the Lord's name in vain would be to take his name upon him and then go out and steal and commit some act, and that reflects poorly on God. So I wanted to kind of flesh this out a little bit deeper. Like I said, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I haven't gone this deep into it. So in Matthew 22, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees ask him, what is the great commandment in the law? And in verses 37 through 40, Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, and on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So Jesus basically summed up the entire commandments into two categories: love of God and love for your neighbor. And you could sum up even those two into love in general, and we see that talked about in 1 John, that God is love. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of flesh out here is, why is it unloving to take the Lord's name in vain? Well, outside of the obvious, the fact that it's utterly disrespectful to God to take his name upon us, and then live in a manner completely counterintuitive to it, it's also a problem because people began to look at us and associate Christ with us, and as a result of that, our actions are oftentimes used as justification for people not coming to Christ, people not surrendering to God, because of how we've portrayed him, or maybe because of how others have betrayed him while taking his name. We see this a lot in different places, like I forget what that fundamental Baptist church is, or whatever, the one that protests all the graves and stuff like that of dead soldiers and so on and so forth. This is utterly taking the Lord's name in vain. It's taking his name upon you and then living in a manner completely contradictory to it. So we could see that that there's two ways of looking at this, or there's two manners in which this becomes unloving. It becomes unloving to God because of the utter disrespect that it shows him, but it also becomes unloving to our neighbor in that it pushes our neighbor further away from God. So I wanted to kind of flush that out. You can look at Revelations 3 verses 14 through the end, 22, and it talks about basically the church of the Laodiceans and how they were basically living in the world and of the world, but still taking Christ's name on them. And Christ, is telling them here that, you're lukewarm, and I'll spew you out of my mouth, and so on and so forth. So we can see, starting from the second book of the Bible, going all the way through the last book of the Bible, to take God's name upon us and then to live in a manner that is completely contradictory to it is something that God has said from beginning to end is something that he hold, or rather that he will not hold guiltless. And we should all kind of look at that, with sober eyes at this point. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you, but also I wanted to encourage you also. We have a dichotomy between Peter and Judas. Both of them denied and betrayed Christ. Both of them played their role. But the mark of a Christian, according to 1 John chapter 2, is that the reason that they left from us is because that they were never really of us. The mark of the true Christian is that Peter repented and returned, where Judas didn't. Judas wallowed in his own self-pity, which is really in a form self-righteousness, because he was counting on his own righteousness and his own actions for his relationship with Christ. And Peter surrendered fully to Christ, and we can see that going on through the book of Acts and then through biblical history, how that played out. So if this has been you, look at it sobering. Pull a Peter, not a Judas. Don't wallow in your own self-pity, but surrender to Christ, repent, confess, and take responsibility for your actions and turn back to him, and just continue on from there. So anyway, all right, you guys, God bless.